Last night, the person you love finally spoke your name. What happened next left everyone stunned. Something happened last night, and if you have been feeling an unexplainable pull inside your heart since you woke up, this may be the reason why. While the world was asleep and silence covered everything around you, a moment unfolded that no one could have predicted. A name was spoken. Not just any name, your name. It escaped the lips of the person you have been thinking about, missing, praying for, or trying so hard to forget. They weren't talking to anyone. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They believed no one could hear them. But the moment your name left their heart and entered the quiet night, something invisible began to move, and what happened seconds later changed everything. You have spent so much time wondering if they still think about you. You questioned every silence, every delayed message, every memory that refused to disappear. Some days you convinced yourself it was over. Other days you felt an invisible thread pulling you back toward them no matter how hard you tried to move on. You told yourself that if they truly cared, they would have done something by now. But life has a strange way of hiding its biggest changes beneath complete silence, and that silence was about to break in a way no one expected. Last night did not begin with romance. It began with loneliness. They found themselves sitting alone, surrounded by familiar walls that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The distractions that once kept their mind busy stopped working. The noise faded. The excuses disappeared. For the first time in a long time, they had nowhere left to run from their own heart. It was as if the universe had gently removed every distraction until only one truth remained, and that truth was waiting to speak. They tried to resist it. They looked away. They picked up their phone, then put it back down. They walked from one room to another hoping the feeling would disappear. But some emotions cannot be outrun. Some memories refuse to stay buried. Every corner of that quiet night seemed to whisper the same message over and over again. Every attempt to silence their thoughts only made one person become clearer in their mind, you. Then something unexpected happened. A song began playing somewhere in the distance. Maybe it came from a passing car. Maybe from a nearby apartment. Maybe from an old playlist they forgot was still saved. The melody wasn't important. What mattered was what it awakened. Suddenly they weren't standing in that room anymore. They were standing inside a memory they thought they had locked away forever. They could hear your laughter. They could remember the way you looked at them. They remembered a version of themselves they hadn't seen in a very long time, and their heart began to tremble. It wasn't guilt that filled the room. It wasn't regret alone. It was realization. They finally understood that every attempt to forget you had only buried their feelings deeper. Every distraction had been temporary. Every denial had been fragile. They had spent months convincing themselves they were stronger without you, but in that quiet moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. The strongest part of them had never stopped reaching for you, and something inside them finally surrendered, without thinking, without planning, without rehearsing a single word. They whispered your name, just once, softly, almost as if they were afraid the silence itself might answer back. The moment your name left their lips, they froze. The room suddenly felt different. The air felt heavier yet strangely peaceful. It was as though speaking your name had unlocked a door they didn't even know existed. They stood completely still, wondering why their heartbeat had suddenly become so loud, until another impossible thing happened. A breeze moved through the room even though every window had been closed. The lights flickered for only a second. Their phone screen lit up without a notification. Tiny moments. Ordinary enough to explain away. Yet together they felt like pieces of something much larger. It was almost as if the universe had been waiting for that single moment of honesty before sending its first response. But the message wasn't clear yet. At nearly the same time, miles away, you experienced something you couldn't explain. Maybe you suddenly woke from a dream without remembering why. Maybe you looked at the clock for no reason. Maybe your heart began racing even though everything around you was completely still. You probably dismissed it as coincidence. But sometimes your soul recognizes a moment long before your mind understands it. Sometimes two hearts can feel the same shift without ever speaking, and this was one of those moments. You have always believed that love should be loud. That if someone truly cared, they would never hesitate. But life keeps teaching a different lesson. The deepest emotions often grow in silence. The biggest transformations happen when nobody is watching. While you were questioning whether they still remembered you, they were quietly losing the battle against feelings they could no longer control. Every day they stayed silent only made your absence louder, until silence itself became unbearable. There was another reason they had stayed away, a reason they never admitted to anyone. It wasn't because they stopped loving you. It wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because they were terrified of becoming vulnerable again. Fear disguised itself as logic. Pride disguised itself as strength. Distance disguised itself as healing. But none of those masks survived the moment your name crossed their lips. For the first time, they saw their own heart without excuses, and what they saw frightened them. As the night grew deeper, they sat in complete darkness thinking about every conversation that ended too soon. Every misunderstanding replayed itself. Every goodbye suddenly sounded different. They realized they had been remembering the painful moments while forgetting the beautiful ones. But once they remembered your smile, your kindness, the quiet comfort of simply being near you, everything else began falling apart. The story they had been telling themselves could no longer survive the truth, and they knew they couldn't hide from it much longer. Meanwhile, your own journey had been changing you in ways you didn't even notice. You learned to survive days you never thought you could survive. You carried heartbreak without letting it harden your spirit. You slowly became someone who valued peace more than chasing people who weren't ready. That quiet transformation created a different energy around you. Even from a distance, something about you felt different. And somehow, without fully understanding why, they could feel that change too. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Just moments after speaking your name, they reached for their phone, not to distract themselves, not to scroll endlessly, not to erase the feeling. They searched for your name, their finger hovered over it, seconds felt like hours. One simple action stood between silence and everything they had been avoiding. Their heart raced as questions flooded their mind. What if you had moved on? What if you ignored them? What if they were already too late? Fear whispered that staying silent would protect them. Love whispered that silence had already stolen enough time, and only one voice could win. But before they could make a decision, something interrupted them. A message appeared, not from you, not from anyone they expected, just a few simple words that felt strangely timed, almost impossible to ignore. It reminded them that life is unpredictable, that tomorrow is never promised, and that some chances disappear forever if you wait too long. Those words landed with unexpected force. Suddenly every excuse they had been holding onto felt small. Every delay felt meaningless. Every reason to stay silent began slipping away, yet one final obstacle still remained. At that exact moment, you looked out your window without knowing why. Maybe the moon caught your attention. Maybe a single star seemed brighter than the others. Maybe you simply felt that strange pull in your heart growing stronger. You couldn't explain it, but deep inside, something told you that an unseen chapter had already begun. You weren't imagining it. You were standing on the edge of a moment that had been quietly unfolding long before you realized it. The truth is, last night was never just about someone speaking your name. It was about a heart finally surrendering after fighting itself for far too long. It was about fear losing its grip. It was about destiny moving one silent piece into place before anyone could see the whole picture. It was about two journeys, separated by distance but connected by something neither of you fully understood. And as dawn slowly approached, the person you love made a decision that would change both of your lives forever. With trembling hands, they unlocked their phone one last time. They opened your conversation. Their fingers finally began to type. One word, then another, then they stopped. Because at that exact second, something appeared on the screen that neither of you could have predicted, and the moment they saw it, everything they believed about your story changed forever. Something happened last night, and if you ignore what you're about to hear, you may miss the moment that changes everything you thought you knew about your heart. You woke up this morning believing it was just another ordinary day, but while you were asleep, something invisible shifted. A name was spoken into the silence. Your name. Not by a stranger. Not by chance. But by the one. Something happened last night, and if you have been wondering why your heart feels different today, why your thoughts keep drifting back to the same person, or why an unexplainable feeling refuses to leave your soul, you need to stay with this until the very end. Because while the world was asleep, something unfolded that no one saw coming. The person you love, the one you thought had forgotten you, the one whose silence felt louder than any words, finally spoke your name. Not by accident. Not as a passing thought. They said your name with an emotion they could no longer hide. And what happened only moments later left everyone who witnessed it completely stunned. You had no idea this moment was building beneath the surface for so long. Every day you believed nothing was changing, something invisible was shifting behind closed doors. Every unanswered message, every memory they tried to bury, every promise they made to themselves to move on slowly became impossible to keep. They fought their feelings in silence because admitting the truth felt more frightening than pretending they no longer cared. But hearts can only hide from themselves for so long, and last night, everything finally reached its breaking point. It started as an ordinary evening. Nothing seemed unusual. The sky looked the same. The streets carried on as always. People laughed, drove home, and continued living their lives without realizing destiny was quietly preparing a moment that would change everything. Somewhere, while surrounded by familiar faces, the person you love suddenly became very quiet. It wasn't because someone asked them a difficult question. It wasn't because of bad news. It was because something inside them awakened without warning, and they couldn't stop thinking about you. At first they tried to ignore it. They distracted themselves with conversations, music, television, anything that could drown out the growing voice inside their heart. But every distraction somehow circled back to you. A song reminded them of your smile. A familiar scent brought back an old memory. Even the smallest coincidence carried your presence. It felt as though the universe itself refused to let your name disappear from their mind. The harder they resisted, the stronger your memory became, until something unexpected forced them to stop running. Then came the silence, not the uncomfortable silence between strangers, but the kind that fills a room when life is about to reveal something important. Everyone around them noticed the sudden change. They stared into the distance as though listening to words no one else could hear. Time seemed to slow. Their heartbeat grew louder than every conversation around them. And without planning it, without realizing anyone was listening, they softly whispered your name. The room froze. Nobody expected it. Conversations stopped in the middle of sentences. Faces turned toward them with confusion. Some people exchanged surprised glances, wondering why your name carried so much emotion. Even they looked shocked by what had just escaped their lips. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't intentional. It was the truth rising from a place too deep to remain hidden any longer. And in that single moment, they realized something they had spent months trying to deny, but another surprise was already waiting. The moment your name left their lips, something inside them changed forever. It felt as if an invisible weight they had carried for so long suddenly became impossible to ignore. Memories they believed had faded returned with incredible clarity. They remembered the way you looked at them when words weren't necessary. They remembered conversations that once seemed ordinary but now felt priceless. They remembered opportunities they let slip away because fear convinced them there would always be another chance. Suddenly they understood there might not be another chance, and that realization shook them deeply. You may have felt something at that exact moment without understanding why. Perhaps you paused in the middle of your evening. Maybe you looked up for no reason at all. Maybe your heart skipped a beat, or you found yourself thinking about them without knowing what triggered it. Some connections cannot be explained through logic alone. Sometimes two hearts remain connected across distance in ways the human mind struggles to understand. While they whispered your name, your soul may have quietly heard the echo, though neither of you fully understood what it meant. The people around them became curious. Someone gently asked why they suddenly looked so emotional. Another joked about your name, expecting laughter to break the tension. But there was no laughter. Instead, they sat there in complete silence, unable to hide the tears gathering in their eyes. For the first time in a very long time, pretending no longer felt possible. Every excuse they had created collapsed beneath the truth they could no longer escape. They finally admitted to themselves that losing you had never stopped hurting, but they still feared it might already be too late. Fear has a strange way of disguising itself as strength. It convinces people that staying silent protects them. It whispers that avoiding vulnerability is safer than risking rejection. For so long, they believed that voice. They convinced themselves distance would erase their feelings. Instead, distance only magnified everything they had refused to face. Every day apart became another reminder that your absence wasn't bringing peace. It was creating an emptiness nothing else could fill. And once they understood that truth, there was no returning to who they used to be. Meanwhile, your own journey has been transforming you in ways you haven't fully noticed. Every disappointment taught you resilience. Every unanswered question strengthened your spirit. Every lonely night quietly shaped your heart into something wiser, calmer, and more authentic. You stopped chasing people who weren't ready to choose you. You began discovering the quiet power of choosing yourself first. That inner transformation became visible in ways you never intended. Even from a distance, your energy had changed, and somehow, they felt it. It wasn't magic. It wasn't coincidence. It was the quiet influence of growth. Sometimes people only recognize your value after you stop trying to convince them of it. Sometimes your greatest transformation happens in complete silence, and the people who once overlooked you suddenly begin seeing you differently. They looked back and realized you had never been asking for perfection. You had simply been asking for honesty. And they finally understood that honesty was the one gift they had been too afraid to give. As the night grew darker, they left everyone behind and stepped outside alone. The cool air couldn't calm the storm inside them. The stars above seemed strangely brighter, as if the universe itself refused to look away from this moment. They whispered your name again, this time with certainty instead of surprise. They admitted aloud what they had spent so long denying. They still loved you. The words felt terrifying, but they also felt like freedom. Yet just as they accepted that truth, something happened that neither they nor anyone else could have expected. Their phones suddenly lit up. For a brief second, their heart raced with impossible hope. They stared at the glowing screen, unable to breathe. Every possibility rushed through their mind at once. Was it a coincidence? Was it a sign? Was this the beginning of something destiny had been quietly arranging all along? Their hands trembled as they reached toward the screen, afraid that one simple moment could change everything forever. At the very same time, you found yourself staring into the distance without knowing why. Something deep inside you refused to settle. It felt as though your heart sensed a door opening somewhere far beyond your sight. Every lesson you had learned, every tear you had cried, every hope you had nearly abandoned suddenly seemed connected to one invisible thread leading toward a moment that had not fully arrived yet. You couldn't explain it, but your soul knew something was different. Neither of you understood that last night was never just about a name being spoken. It was about truth finally becoming stronger than fear. It was about silence surrendering to love. It was about destiny refusing to let two unfinished stories disappear before their lesson had been learned. The whisper of your name was only the beginning. The real miracle had not happened yet. It was still moving toward both of you. One heartbeat at a time, and just when it seemed the universe had finally revealed every secret it had been hiding, the message on that glowing screen appeared, a message so unexpected, so impossible, and so deeply connected to you that everything either of you believed about the past, the present, and the future was about to be turned upside down, and before they could even gather the courage to open it, someone else unexpectedly said your name from the darkness. Something happened last night, and if you ignore what you're about to hear, you may spend the rest of your life wondering why everything suddenly feels different. While the world was asleep, while the streets were silent and the clocks kept moving without anyone paying attention, a moment unfolded that nobody could have predicted. It lasted only seconds, yet it carried the weight of years. The person you love finally spoke your name, not by accident, not because someone reminded them of you, but because something deep inside their heart could no longer stay silent. What happened immediately afterward has remained hidden. Until now, you have probably felt it already without knowing where it came from. Maybe you